There's Jared.
Thank you, guys. So yeah, shifting gears a little bit, both in a little bit of content and also location. I just spent the last few days in New York for the upfront, so this is a very nice change of pace from what I've been dealing with. So yeah, as Lisa had said, we're going to talk through sort of how we've been thinking about, the challenges that we face as marketers to make smart decisions from a media investment perspective. So our job has not gotten easier, and I'm sure that's been a lot of the sort of topic of conversation in the last day or so. So for a little bit of context, Ocean Media is, we're an independent agency. We've been around for about 25 years, and we work with a lot of e-commerce brands. So numbers are important to us. Numbers are certainly important to the brands that we work with. And so we are very focused on, how do we bring data-driven decisioning to media investment strategies for our brands. I think Jennifer highlighted a very great point just now that I deal with on a daily basis. Most of the brands that we work with come to us to fill the top of their funnel. They oftentimes have internal teams that are managing mid and bottom of the funnel strategies, and they look to us to sort of, I guess, avoid or escape the race to the bottom that sort of Jennifer just highlighted. I think this, and let me apologize in advance. Hopefully I will make up for my lack of PowerPoint skills and at least some thoughtful insights. But I think the challenge that we all face is, I'm trying to depict it here, right? As marketers, we want to get, as much as we can from a media insights and learnings perspective. We want to be able to get data that allows us to optimize those campaigns and drive a better ROI or drive a better overall result. The challenge that certainly we face from a day-to-day perspective, and I would hope that this is common amongst the audience here, is that can oftentimes be in conflict with, what the business is trying to accomplish. And the simple example I'll give is, GeoX experiments are very common things to do from a media mix perspective to understand the impact of a particular channel. They are very valuable testing strategies, and they can be very helpful and insightful. However, you're making pretty significant compromises in terms of what you're doing from a marketing perspective in order to make those things happen. And so that push-pull is something that all of us are dealing with daily that is certainly tough to resolve. I think the other thing that has certainly been discussed here is, the sort of crumbling of the cookie and, the small company called Apple that is, very focused on getting people to opt out of device ID, signals in general. I didn't know that they were running an ad campaign, but I just saw a spot on TV last night where they're, demonizing sort of data, the data marketplace, and very specifically showing consumers how to click that, do not allow this app to track my behavior. Not a great thing. Tough on all of us. So the case study that I'm going to run through is for, as Lisa mentioned, a recent campaign that we did where we were launching a new brand in market. This brand is a sort of telehealth services brand. And they had, as most new brands would have, two pretty obvious and sort of standard objectives in terms of what they were trying to accomplish, right? They want to make sure that media is lifting the overall brand and having an impact on the top line business. Thankfully for all of us, it did, so that's good. But more importantly, they wanted to develop cross-channel insights to be able to optimize their media mix moving forward. So this was largely a local sort of geo-based exercise in order to push that lift up and drive that lift on the overall business in order to concentrate the media spend. But we wanted to come out of that having a very good understanding of how should we be adjusting the media mix when launching a national campaign. The target in this case, which obviously is going to inform the media mix that we're going to get to here in a second that we launch with, it's relatively straightforward. Being a healthcare-oriented service, they essentially are relevant, to almost anybody. They did specifically want to skew towards underinsured or uninsured. However, if you did have insurance, it was still a very relevant product for you because essentially you could go online, do a quick consultation, and get a prescription sent to your pharmacy around the corner for 20 bucks. So, given the fact that it had a fairly universal appeal, this is where we started from a media mix perspective. Pretty heavy on linear TV. We'll get to that. Spoiler alert, maybe not the best decision. We did have a mix of both prospecting and remarketing campaigns within all the digital stuff you see on the right-hand side of that pie chart. But from a digital perspective, as Lisa said, we threw a lot of things at this. The brand really wanted to, as did we. We felt it was important, given the sort of appeal of the product and who they were trying to target, that we check the box on all these different channels. So CTV, YouTube, Facebook, so on and so forth. The inherent challenge with this is there's a lot in here, and to understand, what is performing best based on the fact that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 channels, not exactly the easiest thing to pull off. So for all us marketers in the room, the campaign had an impact on the top line business. So the chart on the left is showing sort of the reach over the duration of the campaign. I'll come back to this, but as you can see, it obviously plateaued. That's clearly obviously going to be driven by the sort of investment on the linear TV side of the equation. And then the chart on the right is sort of highlighting the incremental lift that we measured, in both sessions, so site visits, which only 6% of us care about apparently, and actual account creation is the top. The darker blue line. As I mentioned earlier, this was a geocentric campaign in order to have enough media weight to observe that lift in the overall top-line business metrics, and so in this case, it was Dallas and Orlando. So what we've really been focusing on is media mix models in order to answer that question of how can I refine my sort of media investment or channel investment. I think, for a lot of us, whether you're working on these things internally with internal data science teams or third parties like a Nielsen or whatever else, media mix models can be very challenging to execute. And what I've learned in the last year or so, they can be very challenging to make them, easily digestible for key stakeholders. And so what we've tried to do, or what I've tried to do, particularly internally with the teams that I work with, is distill down some of the key considerations that we need to take into account, both from a business perspective and from a media strategy perspective, in order to make these things work, in order to make the models effective, in order to make the models valuable. So one of those is media weight, right? So if you're only spending a tiny amount of money someplace, good chance you're not going to get a good result, right? So you got to be careful about the expectations you set for what you want to get out from a results perspective based on what you're putting in from a spend perspective. The other is variability in spend. Models like change, right? So it is very challenging if you have a very consistent spend on a day-over-day, week-over-week basis for any given channel. That's not good for the model, so you have to kind of figure out how to introduce variability in your sort of media spend on at a minimum a week-to-week basis, but ideally a bit more than that. The third is external factors. So in this particular case, this was about a year ago. One of the primary things we had to control for or account for is the incident rate of COVID, right? So obviously the fact that people are getting COVID and COVID cases are increasing is certainly going to have an impact on somebody who's providing telehealth services. So you do need to account for any of those outside variables that would impact the particular business. And the last is, does the data support the level of precision? So again, depending on how far you want to go down in the weeds, in this particular example, we're just going to look at channel A versus channel B. That has a giant influence on, how many data points, therefore how much spend, et cetera, that you need to sort of build into the model, or that the model is going to need in order to be, statistically stable, relevant, and all that fun stuff that the data scientists like to focus on. I forget I have to push the button. So for us in this particular case, again, apologies for the PowerPoint skills, but we use what is commonly referred to as a ridge regression model in most of the media mix models that we are running at Ocean Media. And it's what I've learned is referred to as an ensemble approach to control for error rate. So essentially what that means is that we're running thousands of models in the background in order to increase the confidence of the overall output. And so from a machine learning perspective, the models that we've created are essentially multiplying in the background in order to sort of give us a very reliable result that we can make confident decisions based off of. From an inputs perspective, fairly straightforward, but obviously we need marketing spends. We need to account for marketing spends outside of those marketing spends that we are specifically managing or allocating for. So in this case, there were some PR, some social posts, et cetera, that we needed to sort of account for within the model. Obviously, all marketing efforts need to go into a media mix model, just regardless of what you're specifically trying to solve for. They're first-party transactional data, so again, like the whole thing is based off of the impact of the business. So we need to get all that sort of CRM or transactional data from them in order to build the models. The economic factors. So in addition to COVID incident case rates, we also had to, in this case, account for at the time, economic factors like stimulus, unemployment, et cetera, that was happening about a year ago. And then the model also accounts for, things like ad stock and response curve, right? So I think we all understand the concept of, what you spend today has an impact later on down the road, especially when we're talking about video or brand-based channels like video. And so accounting for that, I guess, lag or decay is also pretty critical. And the response curve that goes along with that is also a component to that. And again, for us, and I think for a lot of us, this is very much an exercise. I have a little seeing the forest through the trees, so to speak, and not getting lost in the numbers on paper, which is really the punchline that I'm going to get to here in a second, right? So I think the challenge the other challenge that I face, that we probably all face, is the knee-jerk reaction to compare channel A versus channel B based on the numbers on the paper. I want to look at CTV and what my CTV reporting says in terms of ROI and compare that to YouTube. Well, I think we can all agree that that's basically a road to nowhere, in the sense that obviously those two platforms are measuring and accounting for things in a very different way, and to compare those two numbers is something that we probably shouldn't do. And this is why, right? So the chart on the left is really a depiction of the cost per visit based on the numbers on paper, right? So in this view, if we're just taking everything for what it's worth, based on the individual sort of channel metrics that we get from Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, et cetera, and all these things, we would be putting all our money into Snapchat, TikTok, and YouTube for the most part. And we would certainly be putting a lot less money in linear TV. Based on the media mix model results, we would still put considerably less money in linear TV. Again, if you remember the response curve, we capped out way too early. Linear TV we overinvested in. However, in this view, obviously CTV pulls way forward, right? So that whereas that was something that we may have pulled down based on the numbers of paper, the media mix model has shown that CTV has considerable impact. PCTV, for us, that's just, that represents programmatic CTV, so we tend to break out the two different tactics. All the social stuff, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, et cetera, is still very efficient, but again, not as efficient as what the previous view shows us. So this is, what I think is very important to sort of focus on. I think it's a battle that we probably all face, in the sense that, there's a tendency to get in the weeds on everything, and bean count every last little detail, and focus on channel A versus channel B based on the metrics that those channels provide us. But as this example highlights, that's a very good way to mistakenly put your money essentially in the wrong place. So anyway, the moral of the story, I kind of identified most of this. But I think the other thing that I'm sure was discussed yesterday was, walled gardens. As the walled gardens continue to proliferate, this becomes more and more relevant or more important, because again, those things are less comparable. And, if there's anything I can impart, I guess, is education is key, right? So, what I found is that, getting brands, particularly the kind of brands that we work with, who like to dive into the details, to educate them on the value of, how, the media mix models can bring to the table, or just looking at things from a more macro perspective, can help tremendously. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully the PowerPoint wasn't too dry.
Any questions? Yep. Well, because we are talking video a lot, and everyone's really obviously looking towards video, and we're seeing it even in places you wouldn't think, like email or retail markets. They're just obviously trying to use video as well. I mean, does all of that come into the mix when you are planning your video strategy, or is that more supplemental when you kind of think of those things?
So in an ideal world, it absolutely does. So I would say that is in my opinion, oftentimes overlooked creative strategy, in the sense that a lot of brands still continue to think of video as being that omni, messaging, right? The one-size-fits-all messaging, and I can just put out this message via video, regardless, of what channel, and it's going to work. But I think, for the brands that we work with that have invested time and resources to identify right-sizing video and messaging to the specific channel and tactic, that's obviously done, performed substantially better. It's just it's a mindset shift, right? In terms of how a lot of brands have historically thought about creative production and development for video.
Well, but when you're talking all the different channels, and obviously, as you said, you have to sort of, each channel, you're going to use short video for TikTok as opposed to maybe something a little longer.
Yep.
But does that alter the KPIs? Does that make you think in terms of, okay, this is what we're looking for, this is what will be successful on this type of campaign, as opposed to, maybe a fuller video?
Yeah, so I probably should have clarified that earlier. So we do look very closely at, and I think it is very valuable to look at platform metrics when optimizing that specific channel. So if you're running a campaign on TikTok, look at the TikTok reporting and compare tactic A versus tactic B, creative A versus creative B. Those, what I would call directional insights are still extremely valuable to optimize that channel. But if you need to make the decision about how much money should go to TikTok versus YouTube, that's the role of something like this.
Got it. All right. Well, Jared, thank you so much. That was great. Really informative.